Hi everyone. We're going to look at the variety of teaching strategies that you're going to be trying to implement during your time in your practicum, and a little bit of an introduction here about where we're going in the next few weeks. So we're going to look at these teaching strategies. You're going to be intentionally working to implement these through your video capture assignments, trying to record yourself doing these kinds of strategies, trying these strategies out, and then we're going to be supporting each other through the core feedback area. So without any further wasting of time here, we'll look more closely now at the teaching strategies. So this image here is kind of funny because a lot of times when we think about teaching, we think about, that person at the front of the classroom who's, talking at people. But we know that learning doesn't really happen that way, not for like young children, not for adults. At least not the only way that we can learn is by listening to others speak about things. So what we do know is that teaching is both an art and a science. I just love this quote by Richard Elmore that teaching is not rocket science, but that it's actually more complex and demanding than rocket science. So if teaching is a science, what kind of science are we really looking at? We're looking at the research behind how people learn. So we assume in this class that by now you have a foundation in understanding child development, understanding the theories, the current research on how children and people learn. So we're looking at that body of knowledge that we're developing through high quality peer-reviewed research. So the science of child development, neuroscience, and cognitive science are both fields that have contributed greatly to our understanding of teaching and learning. Again, the study of how people learn. So we really do look to these things. I'm making some of an assumption, again, that you have some background in this by the time you get to your second year of study in early childhood. Teaching, though, is also an art. And this is a lot about, the kinds of things that we see in terms of being more intuitive and being responsive and creative about how you approach working with individual children, or capturing that teachable moment when something is about to happen or is happening and you notice it and you find ways to use creative ways to support and guide a child's learning and development. So when we combine the art plus the science, we end up with effective teaching practices. We've had a number of different studies that have looked at this and have found that you can't just be intuitive and have effective teaching happen, have effective learning happen with students. You can't just implement the research-based curriculum in a scripted way either, because these things in isolation do not work as well for children's optimal development and learning as when we combine the art and the science. So essentially, these teaching strategies that we're going to investigate in the next few weeks are all forms of scaffolding. And I hope you've heard this term before. But this image is really a good one for this, because a scaffolding on a building is put in place while a building is being built to support it until it can support itself through its structure. Similarly, there are scaffolding that are for painters who are trying to reach a higher, or window washers who are trying to reach a higher level. So when we look at scaffolding for children, we look at the teacher's supports, the instructional supports, and the environmental supports even that that can help children work within what we call that zone of proximal development, that place where with the right amount of support, children can do better than they can on their own. And so we're gonna look a little bit about some of these different types of scaffolding strategies. Here's another example. So we know that Lev Vygotsky came up with this idea of scaffolding in the zone of proximal development. And this graphic shows you what that means. So again, what a child can do with support today, he can do alone tomorrow. So what we're looking at is, how do we support the child so that they reach the next developmental or learning level and can do that on their own without help. What I like about this graphic is it shows what you can do now is your comfort zone. It's a place where children might feel bored, they might feel restless, and the optimal learning isn't necessarily happening if things are just too easy for the child. Whereas if we put kids where they can't even begin to do what they're doing, we're putting them in a high state of anxiety, of frustration. So we have to use the art and science of what we know about how children learn to really look at getting kids into that optimal zone, that zone of proximal development where they can do it with a little bit of help, and it provides that challenge for the child that really engages them. So what we're really trying to do is use the zone of proximal development to adapt our teaching and instruction for each individual child, because we know not every 3-year-old is going to have the same zone, that there's going to be different strategies we're going to need to use for individual children. And again, this is all about the art and science of teaching. So scaffolding can happen with a supportive adult who provides those different types of strategies to scaffold for learning, or even a more capable peer. So it's somebody who may be at a higher level of development that might be modeling or providing cues and suggestions. I remember when I first introduced some iPads to my preschool classroom, and there was an app we had put on called Counting Caterpillar, and you had to put you had to match up a certain number of objects onto to go with the numerals, and you had to do them in order to earn badges and move forward and all this stuff. And I remember one child who just sort of did it, and then gave a turn to his friend, his peer, and the peer was struggling with us because it was outside of that peer's zone of proximal development. It was too challenging. But instead of giving up because his friend was there to say, hey, try this one next, I think that's next, he got the cues and support that he needed to complete the game without giving up or getting frustrated. And it was a good example of a more capable peer providing the scaffolding support. So I want you to watch the following video and note how the teacher or the adult supports the child's learning.
Very good. This time, why don't you line all the red ones up as you count them? So take them out and line them up in a line. Good boy.
Good boy.
Yep. Oh, hang on.
Yep.
Is that one red?
Oh, hang on. Is that one red?
Is it blue?
Is it blue?
If you get all the red ones together first,
You should
and then
get
you
all
can count
the red
them all.
ones together first, and then you can count them all. That's it.
That's good. Is there any more?
That's good. Is there any more?
Okay, now try and count them for me.
Okay, now try and count them for me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, can you count them again? And this time touch them
Can you
when
count them
you count
again?
them.
And this time touch
Touch
them when
each
you
one.
count
Good
them.
boy.
Touch
Yep.
each one. Good boy.
2,
Yep.
5, 6, 7, 6,
Did it! So how many are there?
Did it! So how many are there?
8, 1, 2, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7.
Start again.
Start again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Well done.
7,
Top work.
Well done. Top work.
Okay.
And where are the blue ones?
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Where was the orange? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Try again, and this time touch each
Try
one.
again, and this time touch each one.
1, 2, 3,
Well done.
6.
Well done.
So in that video example, you can see that how that scaffolded support is starting to be needed less and less as the child gains that skill or knowledge. So later in the video, you saw not only did the child automatically use the categorizing strategy of grouping the objects by color first before counting, but and while the adult continued to provide support for touching each one to get an accurate quantity. You can see this graphic here shows that this is how we work within that zone of proximal development, where on the left side there you see a high level of teacher support for children's learning decreases over time, and the child's responsibility increases over time as they move from one zone into the next. And so each time the child becomes more capable, more independent, more able to do things on their own. So here are the specific strategies that we're going to investigate in the next few weeks of class. This week we're going to be looking at how do we get kids to think more deeply? What kinds of thinking skills do we want to support and encourage? We want them making connections between previous knowledge and the things that they, between previous knowledge and things that they're learning, new knowledge. So we want to link the new to the familiar. We want to promote critical thinking, really deeply thinking about different things. We want them being creative and innovative. And we want them asking questions. So how are we going to promote some of these thinking skills? In the next week, we're going to look at how do we promote communication and collaboration. How do we use language modeling? And that means how do we model use of language to really effectively get kids not only to think, because that's also a big part of it, but to extend their own language development so that they can better communicate with others and collaborate with others. And how do we use effective feedback as a scaffolding strategy, not only again for language development, but for cognition and learning. After that, we're going to look at the informing strategies. So these are things that you probably see a lot more of in the classrooms more often. Teachers explaining, demonstrating, modeling how to use things or how to do things or how to behave. So these are definitely important strategies. What we want to make sure of is that we are building a repertoire of a variety of teaching strategies that scaffold and support learning. Then a big part of this is being able to adapt for individual differences. I mentioned that earlier, but when we differentiate for individual learners, we really are working within the child's zone of proximal development. We cannot get there if we expect all children to be at the same level at the same time. That's not developmentally appropriate. That's not one of the tenets of developmentally appropriate practice is that children learn at varying rates and at varying and in varying ways. So we want to make sure that we are adapting our teaching strategies, our responses, our curriculum, the things we put in front of children to meet those individual differences. And finally, at the end of class, we're going to wrap it all up with a look more closely at what does this mean about intentional teaching. When we're intentional teachers, we really are looking at the why and the what we do, and we can articulate that to others because we have a purpose for what we're doing. We're intentionally applying what we do and say in the classroom to what we know about the science and art of learning.